Let's come to this issue of our own almost loathing now of our own beliefs and values. Here in Australia now we're having an extraordinary debate going on. A very wealthy and likeable, I knew him well, philanthropist called Paul Ramsay, who was very active in the health centre, left a very large amount of money to be made available to set up an academy for the study of Western civilization, and he wanted it to be done in one of our major universities. Now, one of our most acclaimed universities entered into deep negotiations. Then an education union got involved and said, no, this is going to be terrible. It'll be all about European ideas of European supremacy. So that same university has centres for Islamic studies, for Indigenous studies. They are not particularly autonomous in the sense that they're not particularly controlled, it seems, by the university. They do pretty much their own thing. But I know you can't have a centre for the study of Western civilization. It will fill us up with all sorts of racist ideas, supremacist ideas. This is really worrying if we can't understand our own past. In fact, there's a very wise Asian said here the other day, if you want to understand Asian cultures, understand your own first.
Well, I mean, to me, it's just, first of all, in some sense, I'm less worried about what's happening with the universities than I was, because I think that they're going to destroy themselves completely if they continue the way they are. And that all that's going to happen is that people will take the genuine value in the wisdom of the past and present it in alternative forms. They'll just steal it out from underneath the universities. I would say to the philanthropist, if the universities don't want the money, then they should set up an institute on their own.
That may very well be a good course.
You can go directly to the people now. Like for now, so for example, for me, if I want to lecture now, I can lecture on anything I want, whenever I want, with no bureaucratic restrictions, and I have an audience of people who are only listening because they want to listen. That's where the university is. The university is where there's an audience of people who are only listening because they want to be educated. That is the university. The buildings are irrelevant.
Let's build on that for a moment, because watching this debate unfold in Australia, we're listening to academics saying, oh, no, we've got to preserve our academic integrity, and we're here to protect our policies of diversity and inclusiveness and all of those sorts of things. And somebody tartly pointed out, actually, we thought they were there to teach our young people how to think for themselves primarily.
That isn't what they're there for, because that's predicated on the idea that there are sovereign individuals and that they can actually think for themselves as individuals. The whole idea here is that you're not an individual, you're the member of a group. That's it. And they're serious about this. This isn't a trivial objection. It's a fundamental objection. But I would also say, look, there's a New Testament statement, don't cast pearls before swine. And that usually has to do with words, right? Don't waste words of wisdom on those who will not hear. But you could also just look at it literally. If you have pearls and you're trying to give them to someone and they won't take them, then go find someone else to give the pearls to. If you're trying to give money to a university to do something great and they won't take it, it's obvious that they don't want to do anything great. So don't give them the money. It's the wrong people.
Okay, well, let's tease this out a little bit more. Wisdom, you've mentioned. The difference between, if you like, knowledge and accumulated cleverness and what have you, and wisdom. Surely there's a difference, because to go back again to Chatswood, I would say a good chunk of the people there were not university educated, but they were smart. And I'd say more, they were wise.
They were striving for wisdom, and that's where wisdom is. Wisdom is in the striving for wisdom. And right. Wisdom is how to act. Wisdom isn't a collection of facts. Wisdom is knowledge of how to conduct yourself in the world. So it's an action, it's an existential issue. It's truth as revealed in action. That's wisdom.
Wisdom also understands consequences.
Well, it's sophisticated in its understanding of consequences, because you think, well, what are the consequences? And the answer is, well, there's the consequences for you now, and for you next week and next month and 5 years from now. So the consequences are you and future you. So that's an iterated game. But the consequences are also for your family now and in the future, and for your community now and in the future. And wisdom is the ability to consider all of those consequences as part of what guides your vision and your operations in the world. And that's character. And then nobility of character is to take all of those things into account simultaneously.
As I watched the debate, I thought to some extent one of the problems you've got here, as C.S. Lewis might have pointed out, is pride. Pride getting in the way of people having sufficient humility to recognise that the nonsense they're peddling is simply unconvincing in terms of what you might call the pub test. What would pass the pub test out there where people have common sense and can see when people are being real and when they're not being real?
Well, it's easy to dispense with that. You just develop sufficient contempt for the common person, and then you don't have to worry about what they think. You know, and that's when you confuse being smart with being wise. And they're not the same thing. I don't think there's any relationship between them, in fact. I mean, intelligence is a great gift, but it can go terribly wrong. And it can certainly turn into a kind of intellectual arrogance, that's for sure, that blinds you to your own ignorance. And humility is the antidote to that. And the humility, the element of humility there that's necessary is to understand that what you don't know is more important than what you know. And so if you're an ideologue, you dispense with all that because you already know everything.
I've got to say, I was reminded of that when Chatswood has, as you probably gathered, it had a big impact on me, and it was a powerful reminder to me that, for me, it seems very important to recognise that there's a sense in which the more you learn, the more you realise you don't know very much, and there's a lot more to learn.
Yeah, well, and you know, being with an audience can help with that too, because if you're talking to an audience, you can check to see if your message is being received. You know, and you might say, well, these people just can't understand what I have to say. It's like, well, yeah, they probably can if you formulate it carefully and you actually talk to them individual to individual, which is what I try to do in my lectures. Like, I'm not talking to the mob. I'm not talking to the group. I never talk to the group when I'm lecturing. I always pick people in the audience and speak right to them. And they reflect the audit, you know, they reflect the entire group, but they only reflect it because the group is made up of individuals like them. So
let's just go back to something you said earlier that struck me as very interesting. And that is that young people don't want to be involved in political activism. They want to get themselves sorted out first. Many of those young people, though, I think want to behave nobly and help build a better society, a stronger civic square, if I can put it that way, and good on them. That's terrific. That's important. They're very disillusioned with politics, and yet we have to govern our country. We have to make certain that the rules are set, if you like, and that we maximise everybody's opportunities to live in freedom and in security. When young people have, if you like, grounded themselves and feel ready to act nobly in the public square, what should they do? How can they make a difference? They want to make a difference. How do they go about it?
Oh, more power to them, I think. But I think, you know, they start by realizing they don't know anything and by starting to learn. And if they learn and work and discipline themselves, the opportunities to expand will come naturally because people will notice them. Like, look, if you work with competent people, hyper-competent people, one of the things you learn is that hyper-competent people are always looking for young people to mentor.
Yeah.
They're starving and hoping that someone will come along who has a lot of potential, and then what they'll do is offer them an opportunity. You know, and I keep my eye out at the university and in my private work as well, all the time for young people who've got something to contribute. Say, oh, you look like you're sharp. Let's find out. Here's a task. Why don't you go try this? And then they come back and knock it out of the park, and you think, oh, that's good, because I got 20 more things here that need doing that I can't do. I've got more opportunities than I know what to do with. Here's another one. And so the thing is that if you develop your competence and you discipline yourself and you start to make that manifest in any hierarchy that's even vaguely competent, you'll have more opportunities come your way than you'll know what to do with. So it'll happen organically. So, and it is the way of the world. And well, if that isn't happening in the organization that you're working with and you're working diligently and you have your act together, then it's time to find a different organization. But generally speaking, most organizations aren't that corrupt. Some are.
Interesting. I'd say that Australia's we worship youth culture in a way, but one of the things I've noticed about youth is that overwhelmingly, if they have the opportunity to tap into the wisdom of an older person, to be mentored, they go looking for it. They're very keen for it.
Well, it's part of the human proclivity to admire and imitate. I mean, one of the things that drives us forward, we don't only learn by facts. In fact, we hardly learn by facts at all. We learn by stories, and we learn by imitation, and we imitate those we admire, and we admire those who are competent. And so if you find someone who knows what you don't and can operate effectively in the world in a manner that you would like to but can't, then you're going to admire them. And if you admire them, you're going to open the door to have them mentor you. And I mean, that's really fundamental to human cognition and human psychological development. It's the catalyst for human development because we're deeply imitative. It's the thing that distinguishes us from other creatures, perhaps even more fundamentally than language use. If you know how to do something and I watch you do it, I can learn to do it without having to go through all the pain that you had to go through to learn it. It's such a gift.
That's why history is so important. Our personal history, if you like, our family history. I was thinking the other day that my grandfather made a mistake with my father on the farm, that I am determined, because I can learn from that, not to repeat with my own son on the farm. And then there's, of course, the broader cultural history, which is why I believe, and I think you and I share this view, we ought to learn from our history. We ought to learn from the horrors of collectivism in Soviet Russia. We ought to be honest about it. We should teach our young people at the same time as we're honest about the warts in our own cultural history, but we're also honest about the nobility. For example, the mighty push to abolish slavery, surely the greatest human rights movement of all time. We ought to know about it. It's noble. It was led by noble people who struggled against extraordinary odds for a long time.
Yes, exactly. And slavery was a human universal. So it's an amazing, miraculous attainment. It's a miraculous attainment, absolutely. And what we're supposed to be doing in the universities is separating the wheat from the chaff, not dispensing with everything as if it's chaff, because we don't want to put in the effort to discriminate. And so it's easier. Well, it's just all corrupt. It's like, no, it's not. People aren't starving to death anymore, and societies are increasingly free, and children aren't dying in the massive numbers that they once died in, and people's life expectancy has doubled. Like, things are going pretty well. Don't muck it up. And we need to figure out why. And we need to take stock of the things that we did in the past that were wrong, obviously. But that doesn't mean that everything everyone did in the past was wrong. That's not thinking. That's just reflexive resentment masquerading as intellectual superiority. There's nothing about it that's good.
Thank you for watching this episode. We appreciate your support. If you value vital conversations like this one, be sure to subscribe to the channel there and also click the notification bell to stay up to date with new releases.